What's the most wholesome experience you've had with a stranger? I was in the hospital, knowing I'd be there for at least a week, and possibly more. I was sick of hospital food, so I went downstairs to go across the street to the hospital subway. I was pretty far back in the hospital, 6th floor, backside of the building, labyrinth of staircases and hallways, to get out the front door. The walk from there to subway took almost 15 minutes, even though it was just across the street. I waited in line, got up to the counter to order, and realized I'd left my wallet in my room. I ordinarily keep my wallet in my back pocket, but there was no need to in the hospital, since I was in my room most of the time. I was exhausted mentally by that point from the stay, told them I'd forgotten the wallet, and turned to make the trek all the way there and back again. All of a sudden, a nurse behind me bought my food for me, saving me the trip and the money. I thanked him profusely. That was years ago, but I will never forget that act of kindness. My card declined at a fast food place a couple years ago. The manager saw it happening and came up and gave me the food anyway. It may have come from a fuck this establishment mood rather than the unrelenting kindness of his heart, but either way it really made my day. I had a knock on my door, and when I opened it, there was a stranger with a gift card to a local garden store for me. Apparently her kid had been pinching tulips from my garden every day to give to his mom, and they wanted to pay for them once they figured out whose garden they were coming from. I had thought squirrels were doing it and had regretted planting them the year before, not being able to enjoy them. I spent the gift card on more bulbs. This happened when I was around 9 or 10. I was out riding my bike with my mum, and halfway through the trail, my bike breaks down. Anyway, we couldn't carry the bike back home, since it would take hours, so we were just stranded in that field. There were a few people on the trail who saw our inconvenience, but either they didn't have any bike knowledge to know how to fix it, or they couldn't be bothered to care. At least an hour had passed before this old man, and I mean like real old, he looked to be around 80, approached us and fixed our bike free of charge. He got his hands down to the grease, and eventually after a few minutes I could start pedaling again. I thought that was a really wholesome moment, his kindness and coolness to our situation, and that's why this memory sticks to me, I guess. I was using crutches at the time after an ankle injury. Got off the tram to go to uni and hobbled straight into a surprise Melbourne spring storm. Guy with very limited English walked me from the tram stop to my class, holding an umbrella over me the entire walk, about 10 minutes. One of those lovely warm fuzzy memories. When I was 16, I had taken my mama's old Pontiac Bonneville to the movies, and I was in such a hurry that I forgot to turn off the lights. When I came out, the car was dead, but someone left a set of jumper cables on the hood with a note that said, "I hope you make it home safe." I have never ever forgotten about that. Since then I have tried to pay that kindness forward any way I can. Edit. Thank all of you for the awards. I was about 20 miles from home and this was before cell phones were affordable, so that person saved me that night. For those asking, I'm assuming the person came out and saw my lights on and maybe even saw them running low/flickering and knew there was a possibility they would burn out before I made it back to my mum's car. Even if my battery hadn't died, it was a nice gesture. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon just came out in theaters. I had been planning to go see it on my next day off. I did not have a car, so relied on the bus. The day of the movie came, and there was a snowstorm. I walked downtown to get the bus, but there was a sign saying all buses cancelled due to snow. I was super bummed out, and walked over to the local coffee shop. I ordered a coffee, and was telling the owner how disappointed I was that I could not get to the movies. There was an older woman sitting in the shop and she overheard us. She looked at me and said, "I really want to see that movie too. Let us go, irw7oq." So that the day me and a perfect stranger went out to lunch and to see a movie together. About a year later I started seeing this guy in town and his downstairs neighbor was the lady who took me to the movies all those months earlier. We had stopped by her house for her to get a sweater before the movies. I told the guy and your neighbor went to see Crouching Tiger Torgatoro. He was like, that was you? She went on and on about how cool it was to go to the movies. When I was 18 I had a friend in the hospital with brain cancer. His time was limited. I visited him when I could. He was kind of hippie alternative punk. I wore a leather jacket and had long hair. I walked to his room. A nurse saw me. Without saying a word she walked to me and gave me a long comforting hug. That's how I knew he passed. I was really drunk and started puking in the trash can in the woman's bathroom since there was a line to get to a toilet. One of the girls in line held my hair up and rubbed my back, telling me I'd be okay. I drunkenly told her I loved her. I may also have been crying. Wherever you are, bathroom girl, I still love you. I have been diagnosed with PTSD, depression, and anxiety, and I was at the pharmacy trying to get my meds filled, but my card kept declining. A couple of the meds have major side effects if I skip a dose, so I really cold not go without them. I was frantic and trying to figure out what was wrong with my card when another lady smiled and swiped her card for me so I could get my medication refilled. I was in Edinburgh, traveling alone. I met some guys at the hostel and we went to a club, but it was weird, so I came back to the hostel. The hostel is on the Royal Mile. It's 2 AM and there is a girl doing poi juggling. I did some poi juggling myself, so I stopped to watch, and when she stopped, started talking to her. I asked her where she was from. She said Brazil. So, being a stereotype guy like I was, I asked her whether she knew capoeira. She did. So, on Friday night, on the Royal Mile, me and a stranger did capoeira. It was more than 20 years ago, and I still remember it. It was awesome. Driving on the highway, the car in front of me suddenly swerved to take an exit, and then tried to swerve back onto the highway, almost sideswiping me in the process. Luckily there was no one to my left, so I veered into the left lane and avoided an accident. A few moments later I am passing her, and she very sheepishly looks up at me, kind of anticipating and expecting someone to cuss her out. Well, I had just learned a new road trip trick. Flipping people off is stupid, but giving them a thumbs down really stays with someone. It is the I'm not mad disappointed over the road. I had a huge ass thumbs down queued up for this driver, but when I saw her face I immediately knew she did not mean to. She was embarrassed, and she already felt bad enough. So instead I flashed her a huge smile, dramatically and jokingly wiped sweat from my brow, and gave her a giant thumbs up. She smiled and laughed, and honestly it was one of my favorite moments in my life. I was going to a Starbucks to eat with a friend I met days ago. Suddenly a stranger about my age asked me how to go to that exact same place, so I told him that I was going there too, and we started a conversation while walking. When we got to the Starbucks, we sat at different tables and I waited for my friend. He didn't appear because he had had some problems and finally he couldn't go. I asked the stranger if I could eat with him and he accepted. Now we are friends and we sometimes talk through our mobiles. Edit. Grammar. Nope, English isn't my first language, but I'm still learning. I had just lost my job and my dad had his card stolen. He was waiting on the bank, but completely out of food, and living in an old, rundown RV. I would have figured something out. I'd die before I let him starve. Right as hell is almost in tears talking to me about it, someone knocked on the door. A lady had food for someone in an RV, but those people had vacated the parking lot and she wanted to know if my dad needed some sort of local helping hands org. There was everything from canned goods to fresh meat, milk, pasta, everything. She had bought it with her own money and did not want it to go to waste. I'll never forget the timing or her generosity. I'm a wheelchair user. At a baseball game, a little girl came running up to me and climbed onto my lap. Her mom was apologetic, but I told her it was fine, no worries. Looking at the girl's face, I could tell she had some kind of developmental disability. Mom explained to me that the little girl's grandfather used a wheelchair and she missed him. I rolled around a little to give her a ride. She giggled and had a good time. Then she climbed off and went back to her mom. I was once traveling through an old town when I stopped at a small shop to buy some packaged water. I was in my tweens at that time, so I jumped out of my car and went to buy. A very old man sat at the shop. Once I bought everything, he took out an ice cream and handed it to me. As I was about to take the bottles with me, he picked the bottles himself and walked with me to the car so that I could have my ice cream. He was very old and scaly, very thin too, and once he saw that I had a younger sister, he rushed back to the shop to bring out another ice cream for her. I insisted that he take money for it, but he didn't take it and just smiled. Maybe we reminded him of his grandchildren, I presume.